Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening. Today, I am speaking with Iona Italia. Iona is the sub-editor at Areo magazine. She's also the author of two books. She does copy editing. She's also a freelance writer, and she has contributed to Areo. Hi, Iona. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Bite.
So I was just wondering. I was hoping. Okay, first I want to talk about your newest book, just because I will be completely honest here. All I knew about Tango before I read your book was that Robert Duvall did it, and whatever stereotypes you would see on sitcoms and on the Flintstones, and so that was the extent of my knowledge of Tango until I'd read your book. And so I thought maybe you could give people a bit of your background, and then we could start talking about your book, because you do kind of talk a little bit about your background at the very, very start of your book. So I was hoping we can kind of mix the two together.
Okay, so let me see. I was I spent my early years in Karachi, my early childhood, and I'm from a Parsi background on my father's side. Being a Parsi is patrilineal, so I am a Parsi, and I had my initiation to the Zoroastrian religion, my Naujat, in Karachi in 1977, and then I moved to the UK. My parents died. I grew up with various family members on my mother's side and partly in state-appointed foster care also. And then I went to Cambridge University. I studied English literature and I did a PhD in English. And I was an academic for about 10 years. My speciality subject was 18th century literature, and I have published a book on 18th century essays, which is called Anxious Employment, with Routledge. And then in 2006, I and my then husband came here to Buenos Aires. I took a year's unpaid leave. We both took unpaid leave from our jobs in order to study tango. I already danced tango at that stage, but I wanted to study more intensively, so we came for a year to study. And I fell in love with tango so much that we both, well, I quit my job and I won't go into his story, but I left my job, decided to stay in Buenos Aires. I taught tango for a number of years here. And that's it. I don't think I have anything else to say.
Okay, no, that's good. Okay, especially like the bit about the tango. So you mentioned you tango before, but just like from like, I mean, we got to know each other over Twitter, and so some of the things I seen you, like, I mean, I've seen that you tweeted out about ballet and stuff as well. So were you always dancing growing up, or like was that something later that you started doing later, or?
Well, I didn't have any opportunities to do any dance lessons of any kind growing up. So I began dancing when I was an undergraduate, and I have done a variety of different dance forms. And then I discovered tango. Yeah, it's not a very interesting story, I'm afraid. I don't have an interesting origin story for my tango.
Oh,
Um,
no, it's just curiosity, like I said, because you had mentioned the ballet. Okay, so speaking of the tango, as I said, I knew practically nothing about the tango except for the little I'd mentioned, right? Uh, but I don't want to try to make this sound like you did a Jordan Peterson-esque guide for lobsters or anything, but I because I mean you broke the book down into two sections, like the technical side of it and the community aspect of it, and we are promised a second volume. Um,
the
but
second volume is coming out in January.
okay, cool.
The small independent publishers who
Yeah.
I published with, I signed a contract with them for both volumes. So
Cool.
the second volume will come out um, shortly.
But like especially like the technical side of it, I think I enjoyed the community side of the book a little more than the technical, just because I'm not a dancer. But the technical part of it, I mean, there's some universality to it, and it's because you kept stressing the practice and the discipline, and that goes for just about anything. Like you can't be a good writer unless you write all the time. If I work in IT, and unless I keep myself busy and keep up to speed with what's going on, I'm not going to be good at what I do, right? So if you want to be good at anything, and if you want to succeed at anything, it requires discipline. So, I like, especially like I said at the very start when you were talking more about the practice and you're talking about the discipline, like I could really appreciate that, but I liked how you went through the technical aspects of it to try to give an understanding, like to someone like me who has no comprehension of or knew anything about tango to begin with.
When you say technical, I think that's maybe a little bit misleading
Okay.
because it's not an instructional book on how to dance.
Okay,
So
sorry.
I,
Yeah, I sorry. I
yeah,
don't mean to interrupt you, and I shouldn't have said that. It's
yeah.
just you were talking more about the techniques and
Well, not techniques so much as the psychology of learning and how to work well with another person, how to get the most out of a lesson, how to get the most out of teaching, how to teach most effectively. But you can't learn to dance tango from reading this book. Um, I really say almost nothing about the technical aspects of it within the book. It's about culture and psychology,
yeah.
and yeah. Sorry, go
So
ahead.
sorry. I didn't mean to. I should not have employed that. Maybe I just. That's not what I was trying to get at. That you were teaching people. It was like a step by step. Because like that's why I was trying to get at when you're talking about the practice and the discipline and having to work at it all the time. Like that's what I got more out of that side of the book as opposed to the community building side of the book. And like I said, that's something that's kind of universal. If you don't practice, if you don't have discipline, you know, there's different ways to learn different things, and like you talked about the different styles of dancing that people could use, and trying to find one that fits for you or working. And I'm just saying, like, some of those things are kind of universal that you can use for other things.
Yes, I think so.
Um. Anyway, so what what made you like? Okay, there's another thing. Like, I maybe I'm reading too much into it. It was almost like you were writing a love letter to the dance and to the people who did it. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that or if I'm romanticizing it too much. I mean,
Well,
like,
I think I mean, I can't see how you can be passionate about a topic without and if, without valuing that, without how you can be passionate about any activity without valuing that activity. And I think that there is the a kind of opposite of diminishing returns, which is that if you I have the opposite of a kind of ADHD. I would say it's the anti ADHD. So people who have an attention deficit disorder or who have a very um, short attention span want a lot of variety. And there are people who enjoy finding out a little bit about wide, a large number of topics, who want to be informed in a sort of overall in a broader manner. And I really don't have that tendency at all. My experience is actually that the deeper you go into a topic, any topic, the almost any topic, uh, the more intricately and the more carefully you examine that topic, and the more you think about it, the richer it is. So in fact, the deeper you go in your examination of anything, the more rewarding it becomes.
oh no, I totally see that. I mean, and that's obviously, like you said, it has to be something you're passionate about, and you know the average person who maybe goes to a job that they don't really find meaningful or something, I don't think they'll ever find that until they find something that they're truly passionate about.
It's the important thing is finding meaning in something outside yourself, something which has beauty or significance for its own sake. So you're engaging with a discipline or a tradition or body of knowledge or whatever it might be, um, completely for its own sake, for the sake of it, the fascination, the richness that that subject itself provides, not for any kind of monetary benefit or status that it could bring to you yourself. And it's beyond the purely personal. So in that sense, every book that examines a topic in depth could be said to be a love letter, right? To that topic.
I guess, but I mean, you could read a book on history, and I mean, I do love history, and there are some well written books like reading something by Tom Holland I enjoy very much, or you could read something that's the person might know it inside out, but it's just you can almost hear a monotone droning voice in the background, and you don't sense any like passion or anything in there. It's just like here's some facts type of thing, you know.
Some people are not very good at conveying passion,
Yeah.
and if you try to convey it, that is counterproductive. Um, I have to say, when I first started writing and I began the book was born out of a blog, and the blog is a little bit more poetic than the book. So I wrote also a lot of short fictional sketches, which are not within the book, at least not in this first volume. There'll be more in the second volume. And I like to, what I'm doing when I'm describing the experience of dancing is, it is, Wordsworth described writing poetry as being emotion recollected in tranquility. So what I'm doing is reconstructing in my memory what the feeling was and trying to express that feeling with precision by using metaphor, etc. And I had a lot of people telling me, first of all, saying there's no way that you can write about or describe an experience of dancing. There's no point in attempting to describe this in words. There's no kind of it's just as silly to write about dance as it is to paint about architectures. One thing that people would often say to me. But I think that, in fact, I think that we can draw comparisons, and we do draw comparisons all the time, even in normal speech, between different types of experience. So we can say, well, to help you understand this experience you haven't had, I'm going to compare it to an experience you have had, and I'm going to try to show you where the points of contact are, where the similarity is. So I've had a lot of people telling me that there's no point in attempting to describe things which are not themselves verbal phenomena. And I think that's sort of a non-starter for me.
Just excuse me, but I'm still having I don't understand how someone can say that. I mean,
It's a very, very common critique that I hear, that there is no point in writing about something that is not itself a verbal phenomenon, that's not itself ideas that were originally expressed in language.
But I mean, people have written about paintings, and people have written about all kinds of nonverbal things.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, it just that just
it's a
boggles the mind.
it's a common, but to me um, rather odd attitude. I think there are people who just prefer things not to be put into words, and that's fine. But I feel that, especially with an experience that is a fleeting experience like dance, being able to capture that experience in words enriches it. And the experience of describing something is its own pleasure. Finding the right comparisons and metaphors and phrases to express that is its own sort of pleasure and satisfaction. That's one thing. The other thing is that at the beginning, when I first started writing, I think less so, a few years into when I was writing regularly and blogging about this, is that people told me, you are making a mountain out of a molehill. Nobody really enjoys dancing that much. You make it sound like this extraordinarily blissful experience, and meh, it's quite nice, but it's no big deal. um, and I also find it very hard to. I find it really hard to understand that attitude too. I think some people do just have only a very small subset of experiences which they find rich and meaningful, whereas I think you can find almost any experience rich and meaningful. Um,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
anyway,
okay, I will agree. I will agree with you there. But okay, I mean, I'm someone, I have no sense of rhythm. Um, you know, it's not that I have two left feet. It's like I have two club feet. Club feet. You know, like I just awful when it comes to dancing. So it's not something I've ever taken up. Just I've tried, and just like I said, it's a horrible, horrible spectacle. But when you're talking about you can find meaning anywhere, it's not quite the same thing. But when I worked in Afghanistan, and some of the people would look out, and it's even the mountains around Kabul, they're desolate, and they'd say, well, it's so harsh, but I'm like, look at it. And in the spring when the snow starts to melt and there's water up on the mountains, they turn green, and you'll see some colors from some flowers. I said, it looks really nice. I mean, we're in the middle of a horrific thing. It's stark and it's harsh, but there is some beauty to it, and it's what we're talking about, the experiences. I mean, you can find, like you said, a meaningful experience, or you can find a transcendental experience, and just about anywhere, and especially if it's something that you enjoy, or if it's something that brings you some sort of pleasure, right?
mm, yeah, I agree. Um, Talking about the not being able to dance thing, I think this is interesting because while I do think there are some people who genuinely are not going to be able to dance, so tango is very, I should preface this by saying that tango is very frequently used as a therapy. So I know it's used for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's disease. It's very common to use tango therapy now for Parkinson's, and there have been a lot of studies, a number of studies on this. Um, so it is possible, of course, to dance with certain physical disabilities, and it depends on the style of dance. Um, but I think that there are probably some physical and mental disabilities that create specific challenges within the dance, and may mean that you're never able to dance at a high professional level. But nevertheless, the idea that for most people, when they say they can't dance, what they mean is they've never attempted to learn. And I'm always reminded of an anecdote about Freddie Mercury, who is one of my heroes, that Freddie went to take a driving lesson, and he took one lesson, and he came back from the lesson and he told his mother. His mother reports this story, and he said, "Mom, I can't drive. I tried it in this lesson, this 1 hour lesson today. I'm not a, the lesson that came to the end." This isn't how he expressed it. He put it in a much more sardonic way, but I came to the end of the lesson. I'm still not able to do it. Clearly, I'm not cut out for driving. That's it. And most people don't have that attitude to driving. They realize that to learn to drive, you have to take some lessons. And then most people find that after whatever number of lessons it is, they are able to learn. And it's only quite small minority of people who really try to learn to drive and are just not able to do it. And there are a few people also who have mental or physical disabilities that make it impossible for them or dangerous for them to drive. And I think that dance is very similar. There are certain dances which are dancers' dances, like ballet, which you can obviously take up as an adult, and I did take it up as an adult, but I will never dance ballet professionally. That would be impossible because the kinds of physical challenges that ballet presents, you can only overcome with the aid of A, good genetics. You can't get past that. And B, intensive training from an early age. But most popular dances, and tango is a popular dance, it's an urban folk dance for Buenos Aires, are not like that. They are designed for everybody to be able to dance them. But you can't, it's not instantly intuitive. You can't get up and immediately be able to dance. You have to learn, and just like learning to drive, it's a process. So when people say they can't dance, what that usually means is they haven't attempted to learn. And they feel that, unlike driving, they feel it's something they should just naturally be born being able to do or unable to do. But that's not quite how dance works.
Yeah, okay. I mean, granted, I'll give you all that. I mean, if I really wanted to learn and I took classes, that'd be a different thing. I was talking more of just out with friends at a club and gyrating on the dance floor. Like like I said, I have absolutely no rhythm or no sense of rhythm or whatsoever. So I'm not saying I would be a great dancer, but I'm sure if I stuck to it and took lessons and as you'd mentioned again, the practice and the you have to discipline yourself to do it, I'm sure I would be passable. I'm not saying that it's it's an unsurmountable challenge, but life's short.
Realize you should put video in the show notes to show your dancing.
Oh.
So that listeners can let listeners judge for themselves whether or not you're a hopeless case. And if you are, at least you will spread some joy and amusement in the world.
Yeah, I embarrass myself on a regular basis. I don't think I need to do much more of that. I wanted to. I just wanted to switch up a little bit to talk about some of the stuff you do at Areo.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Because I mean, I've been following it. I don't think I started reading it until about. I think it was right around the time Helen started editing it, and then you started working with her on it. It's just I'd been away for a while. Like I only got back to North America at the start of 2014, and that's when I started really getting into social media and stuff and started following things. So, around the time, around that time I started reading Areo, and then there was Conardus as well that had come out, and then I think Colette came out a little bit after. And I quite enjoyed it, and I like the fact that you guys have differing opinions, and it's not just one worldview coming from this one place. I know it had started before. So what made you and Helen, or I guess I don't know if Helen was leading that or how that worked out. What made you guys kind of take it up after? I think they were going to fold it or something, or they wanted to stop working on it. The original people who started it, if I get this correct.
So it was founded by Malhar Mali, and he was running the magazine single-handedly until I think it was May of last year, May of 2018, okay. When Helen took over the editorship. And Malhar is only 25, and he has he has his own career plans. Mm-hmm. And Areo, of course, is not, well, so far it has not been it so far does not provide really a financial support for people much. How shall I put this? It's not a career, and so he decided that he didn't want to invest. So was not able to invest that kind of time in the enterprise. But he was the one who built it up and began it. So Helen took over from Malhar, and then she hired me to be the sub editor and do the copy editing, etc. And then I also host the associated podcast, which is called Two for Tea.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. I thought so. Then I must have started reading it before you and Helen started working there, because I thought that was in 2017 or a little bit earlier. I maybe just have my
I'm
timelines
I'm
wrong.
I'm not sure when Malhar founded the magazine.
Hmm.
I'm just taking a look to see when my first contribution was. So um, I first started writing for Areo. I had never done any political writing before. Um, and then I joined Twitter for quite unrelated reasons. Yeah, so I think I originally founded my Twitter account a few years ago, but I had never used it. Well, I used it a few times. I tweeted out some things. I had 0 followers and no one responded. So I thought, what is the point of this? It's, shouting at the void. I didn't understand how to use the platform at all. So I just stopped using it for years. And then I had a friend who was working in offshore drilling, and I wanted to be able to chat to him, and we couldn't chat on Facebook because Facebook didn't work very well in offshore on the kind of narrow Wi-Fi, or not very good Wi-Fi reception they have there. So I actually resuscitated my Twitter account so that I could chat to him, and we were talking about Parsi related things. And I was here in Buenos Aires, he was in India. So I would chat to him he would chat to me whilst he was having breakfast, which was right before I went to bed. And since I was chatting to him anyway in the DMs, I started posting some things on Twitter. And for some reason, Malhar spotted some of my tweets and he began following me. Or I think I began following him and then he followed me back. And he liked the things that I had to say, so he asked me if I would. He commissioned me to review a documentary film for him, which was a film called The Red Pill by Cassie J. It's a documentary about the men's rights movements. So that was the first ever, I think, political writing that I had done, and that was in June 26th of 2017. They published that. And I wrote several other pieces for Areo under Malhar's editorship, and then Helen took over about a year later.
Okay.
So it was around May or June of last year that Helen took over the editorship and hired me as the sub-editor.
Okay, the Twitter thing, if you want to maybe, because Twitter is a very, very odd thing. I was the same. I joined Twitter when it was first starting, and it was supposed to be, I went and saw this movie, it was great. I ate at this restaurant, it was awesome. And then celebrities started using it to let people know where they were, especially the paparazzi and stuff. And then it devolved into the sort of cesspool it is now. And so I never really used it. I was the same thing. I had 10 people that followed me, and I was following 30 or 40 people, and they were people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Sam Harris and stuff like that. And it was only I went on a friend's podcast, and it was just when it came out, I said, okay, fine, whatever, I'll tweet it out, and that's it. And then I mean I started tweeting more, and I mean most of what I do is just snark, I think. And it's only usually with people I know, like, I've left you a couple of snarky comments. It's not like snark as in, okay, well, getting back at you or whatever. It's just, I don't know these people who can do these long threads on Twitter. I don't understand how people can do that.
I write a lot of long threads on Twitter. I feel that what I most dislike about Twitter is the precarity of it, precariousness. So there are, on Twitter, the administration of the platform can ban users at any time, and there are no clear rules as to what will get you banned, and there's no appeals process. So very recently, I think Kathy Young, somebody um, swore at Kathy Young and said she was an ugly, hook-nosed kike or something. And one of Kathy's own friends responded to this, basically with some snarky comment about what a loser this person was. And that friend was permanently banned from Twitter.
Yeah, I know. I'd been speaking to someone about this, and I at that point I had said, sorry, I didn't mean to take this tangent onto Twitter, but I'd said that Twitter should do one of two things. Like I not just Twitter, but all of social media, they should act more as librarians than what they're doing now, than as landlords. Um, they should just be the curators of the knowledge instead of like landlords who can evict you at any time. And I said, if they are going to be landlords, then the terms of the lease have to be crystal clear and they have to be applied equally across the board. Because, there's no way that there should be ISIS accounts that are still allowed that are calling for the death of everyone who is, everyone except for whoever is that specific type of Muslim that ISIS wants. Those kind of accounts should not be allowed as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I know you are pretty much an absolutist of free speech, and I'm in that vein, but I don't think calling for violence lands in that. But yeah, the social
I,
media.
yeah, I am an absolutist and I'm fine with the ISIS accounts, with neo-Nazi accounts, with whatever type of accounts. I think that probably doxing should be, people should be taken off the platform for doxing, i.e. for publishing people's names and addresses, because that is a credible threat, unless unless their addresses obviously are published somewhere else publicly, unless they've made those known. But otherwise, it is a credible threat. If, for example, I tweeted out the address of the Quilliam offices, that I feel is an offence for which one should be banned from the platform. But and I would say the same thing about tweeting at people's employers or publishing the address of their place of work and their office hours, etc. I've seen people do things like that. And also, I would say that child pornography and pedophile activity should probably also get you banned from the platform. And a third thing, which is if you are the leader of a country in which you have banned your citizens from using Twitter, then yourself should probably not be permitted to have a Twitter account. With those exceptions, I would say I would allow every other kind of speech, including some of the very offensive things that I agree are genuinely offensive and bad. Because there is no way for an algorithm to tell the difference.
Yeah, I know. I mean, okay, I don't want to ban people for calling. Let's say someone calls me a raghead or a packy or something, right? I don't want them banned for that. But if someone is inciting people, like I said, let's say it's an ISIS account and I'm an ex-Muslim, and they're saying, okay, everyone go kill this apostate. That is a incitement to violence, and that should be banned.
I think if we could be clear about that, maybe, but I just think we're talking about AI here.
Yeah, I know.
In the filtering, we're not talking about people who are able to read and tell from the context. This is why Inas was banned for saying people should be killed for making chocolate chip hummus. Any human being reading that can tell that is a joke. But obviously, the AI cannot tell that. The word kill was in there, and so she was banned. And I think that since AI cannot tell the difference, these types of algorithms or bots or whatever it is they're using cannot tell the difference between irony and seriousness, have no sense of context, will ban somebody for responding to a threat or offensive thing that was said to them, and not the person who made the threat or offensive thing, because they can't even tell the difference between those two interlocutors in the conversation.
Yeah.
That I think is because that is the situation, I feel that we should not be banning anybody. And I would rather ISIS accounts are up there, and I know that my own account will not get suddenly banned tomorrow for reasons which will remain a complete mystery to me. Um,
Yeah,
and I do think all of my liberal friends disagree with me on this. They all say to me, well, Twitter is a private company. They can do whatever they want. They should be allowed to do whatever they please. And I'm very disappointed in this. Um, I'm very disappointed in this attitude and approach because I think that Twitter is much more than some has become much more than some private company. It is the only viable platform for certain types of speech. The only viable platform. Obviously, you can go and join Elephant or whatever those other platforms are called, but if you're only speaking to three other people, and this is why Google Plus failed. It's the point is not that there is somewhere that you can put out your words. The platform only functions if you have a minimum number of people using it.
yeah,
I'm
no,
not going to bother
I'll,
to tweet to the kind of 300 people on Elephant. Um, what? Why would I do that? I want to be in a public platform, and it's become one of the main places where writers and journalists and independent publications are able to promote themselves, get a readership, etc. And there really is no viable alternative.
no, I agree with all that, and I mean, again, with the violence thing, I know what you're trying to say. I agree with you. Like, okay, I understand private business, and you should have the right to run your business without government interference. Yes, but Twitter has become our town square, right? Um, there are a lot of people who are saying, "Oh, we should limit how we do things on social media," and I always go back to the Milton work, Areopagitica, and I said, this argument's been had. It was had with the printing press, and the internet is, putting information out there at a far greater speed and quantity than the printing press ever did. But the arguments that Milton made in Areopagitica, I think, stand for social media and the necessity for free speech. And with the violence thing, there maybe it's okay if someone made a threat towards me, it's up to me to report it, and then that gets taken a look at by someone, not by an algorithm. It's not an algorithm just saying, okay, if someone uses the word kill, remove them, because a comedian can say, I killed it last night, right? Meaning that he did a really good job, and
Yeah,
an
but
algorithm could ban you.
it's not a person, it's an algorithm. And there's also you're generally not told why, and there's no appeals process. There's no appeals process. There's no way of getting in touch with the people behind the scenes at Twitter. There's no actual Twitter support. When I'm using, for example, a company like PayPal, for example, if there's some issue with my PayPal account, there is a chat function that you can go to, and you can talk to the PayPal representatives, and you will have an actual person on the other end of the chat line to whom you can explain your issue. And PayPal will sometimes also suspend accounts because they don't understand why you've received a certain payment, etc., and you need to explain or make sure that payments have been filed under the correct category, etc. You need to fulfill certain international finance laws. But when your account is suspended on PayPal, you can go to the help center and talk to a person, but you cannot do that on Twitter. There's no help center for Twitter. There's no support for Twitter. And there really ought to be. It is $1 billion company. You're telling me they can't afford to have a help center for people whose accounts have been suspended or banned?
Yeah. Again, I've never really looked into that end of things. I was just thinking, like, from the outside, like how to curate it. But I think sorry, I didn't mean to devolve into this thing on Twitter, because
Of
I don't
course.
I don't I don't know how we got onto it. But yeah, if we want to get back to Areo and what you were doing there, and because I mean I do like that magazine quite a bit. It's one of the few that I'm reading regularly online. It's that Colette. I think are the two that I read the most regularly online. Then I kind of just find stuff here and there. Um, and I said I do appreciate the fact that you guys will bring in. You're not just one view of things, right? You'll have opinions from all sides coming in.
Well, I think what people don't, I think people don't really understand how a nonpartisan magazine works. Um, and clearly you do, but um, I what I really like about Areo is that we are attempting to give a space, a non-partisan space um, for calm, rational voices that are both that can be both left-leaning, right-leaning, libertarian, socialist, from various parts of the political spectrum. And as long as they are committed to a universal liberal humanist ethos, and by that I mean that we wouldn't, for example, accept an article which was overtly and blatantly racist. That's not that would go against our universal liberal humanist principles. And we also wouldn't accept an article that said, for example, we need to ban homosexuality because it's a sin, and I know this because it says so in the Bible. That's not a rational take. It could be a defensible take. I mean, I think it's personally indefensible, but it's a reasonable opinion to have and express. As far as my free speech principles go, I have no problem with somebody saying that, but it's not an argument that would be suited to our magazine, for example. So it's not that we would publish any opinion. There are certain opinions which don't fall within a universal liberal humanist framework, but within that you could have both social justice leftist approaches, and we have published a few of those, not so many, but we have published a few of those. You can have more right-leaning approaches. You can have conservative approaches. You can have socialist approaches. There are a range of different ways of looking at the world and different flavors of politics and of different political and social beliefs which still fall within this general umbrella of a respect for human rights and a liberal approach, and by that we mean an approach that basically respects free speech, diversity of opinion, diversity of people, that doesn't see one particular race, skin color, sex, sexuality as inherently and inarguably superior, etc. So I think that I think a lot of people just simply cannot understand that the magazine is not mine and Helen's soapbox. And I have a lot of people often, for example, when we've published an article, and it may be an article that I don't agree with. So I have disagreed with a lot of articles we have published, but almost all the articles we published, there are a few that we've published because Helen liked them, and I personally would not have published them because, Helen and I are slightly different people. So there are a few articles that are kind of borderline, which I personally would not have published, and vice versa. There are some that I probably would have published that Helen rejected. But in most cases, in 99% of cases, I will stand by our having published the article. I feel it was readable, worth reading. It was a point of view that was worthy of being heard. But that is not the same as it being my point of view, my personal opinion, or the opinion that I agree with. And people many people just seem to find it impossible to differentiate those two things. So the articles that I do agree with from Areo I retweet on my own timeline on Twitter, and I share them there. So if you want to know which articles I personally particularly agree with, it's very easy. Go to my timeline. And if you want to know which ones Helen agrees with, go to her timeline. But I'm constantly confronted with people saying, you published this. How can you defend this statement? And why do you think X? And why did you say Y? But I didn't say it. The author of the article said it. And if you want to have a debate about it, all of our articles have comments, the comment section enabled. Go to the comment section and publish your comment there, or tweet at if the author is on Twitter, tweet at the author, him or herself.
Just a couple, sorry, yeah, just a couple of things, because there was a couple of things that I wanted to. There's something you brought up, and I'm hoping maybe you can try to like beat this to the ground, because it's something that annoys the hell out of me. How can you be a free speech absolutist and say, well, you know, it's something I've seen come at you, and you say, how can you be a free speech absolutist and then want to not publish something, right? So you're denying them their free speech. Like Areo, you know, you guys put out a statement. This is what we're looking for. This is what we want. I'm going to give you an absurd example, but let's just say Areo was a magazine dedicated to dance. Someone wouldn't logically or reasonably expect you to publish a story about crochet, right? It's and so you guys have laid out, like you said, you know, you've laid out, we're looking for these type of stories or these type of, you know, articles or opinion pieces, and within that you'll you know, as long as it's well written and it's within that framework, you'll take any opinion from any side. But you know, just because you're not publishing something, you're not denying free speech.
I think that there's a real misunderstanding about free speech and attention. So the freedom of expression, as we should more accurately call it, because free speech doesn't literally mean that every single word that comes out of your mouth is allowable. So, for example, if I have you up against the wall and I have my firing squad there and I say aim, fire, that is not free speech. It's not expression of opinion. But freedom of expression does not equal a right to force your other people to give you their time and attention. So what freedom of speech should entail for me is your freedom to say whatever you want, to express the opinion you want. When I say or speak, I'm talking about expressing opinions, or creating art, which is another way of expressing an opinion, in a sense. You should be free to say whatever you want, write whatever you want, read whatever you want, and listen to whatever you want. And nobody should be able to obstruct you in doing any of those four things, with a few possible exceptions, some of which we talked about earlier. If it's really pure expression of opinion, then no one should be able to obstruct you in any of those four activities. And that includes obstructing you by using their voice, by, for example, if you've gone to hear a speaker shouting down that speaker, or using noisemakers or setting off the fire alarm, etc., to make it impossible for you to listen to the person who you choose to listen to. So all of those things are protected under free speech. What you cannot do under free speech is force someone else to listen to you who doesn't want to, force someone else to publish you who doesn't wish to, force someone to read your book who doesn't want to. So while I feel that while I disagree with censorship, so for example, if Areo published something controversial, Helen and I at one point were going to publish an article with a very controversial title, and I said to her, I don't know that we should publish it under this title because there will be such a huge backlash. And she said, I don't care if there's a backlash or not, because it's our I don't want us to be cowed by people's irrational responses. If we feel something is worthy of publication, we should be able to publish it without allowing ourselves to be gagged by fear of other people's responses. Are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
I'm not. I'm agreeing with I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. So I'm happy to let you go.
Okay. So on the one hand, we shouldn't. Um, there shouldn't be censorship, but you also do not have the right to anybody else's time and attention. And my time is valuable. You do not have the right to make me copy edit your article. I'm a professional copy editor. I'm paid for my work at Areo, and I also, if you want to make sure I copy edit your article and we don't accept it at Areo, then please email me and send me your article, and I will be happy to copy edit it for you to the absolute best of my ability for a fee. But you don't have the right to demand I edit your article. You don't have the right to demand space in our magazine. I know it's a digital magazine, so in theory we could publish an infinite number of bytes of information, but in actuality, first of all, I don't have the time to copy edit that amount of material. And secondly, if Areo published 500 articles a day, each single article would receive very little attention. It would be extremely counterproductive. There's a law of diminishing returns there. So in a very real sense, our time is limited, space in our magazine is limited, and it is not, there's no one is entitled to space there. And I think that there is a misunderstanding that a lot of people have. They believe that as the editor of an online magazine, you are inundated with amazing pieces of writing, and so you can pick and choose those which exactly fit your personal philosophy. So you are, in a sense, censoring other views. But in fact, not that many people can write well. So if you have an article that is well written and well argued, then it's very unlikely that you're not going to publish that article because it doesn't fit your exact worldview. If we have a well-written article that people are going to enjoy reading, and that is either already very well expressed or with some work on my part can be turned into something that's very well expressed, because sometimes we do have writers who have really interesting ideas or valuable things to say but are not very good essayists, and I kind of whip their essays into shape a little bit. If what you have to say is well expressed and is going to be entertaining to read, then probably we will publish it. But you yourself may not be the best judge of whether it meets that hurdle.
Yeah, obviously. No, but I mean, like, that's what I was trying to get at, because, like I said, I have seen that.
This should be obvious. I know this should be obvious, but it seems that to many people it's not.
Yeah,
so
the only reason I brought it up because I have seen those criticisms towards both you and Helen, saying, "Well, you guys say you're for free speech, but you wouldn't publish this," and it's just like, you're not obliged to publish everything people give you, because you have set out specifics of what the aim of Areo is, and if it doesn't fit that aim, you have no reason to publish it. And it's like the people who, sorry, I'm gonna, just because free speech is such an important thing to me. I've worked in war zones. I've been to places where it's denied. And it just, I can't believe people want to give it away, and that, it's usually the people who demand that people be censored and people be shut down that freak out when they're being shut down and no one's defending them.
Right, exactly.
And the people who want to shut people down are the ones who demand the loudest to be, you have to give me a stage. And and then that's when they bring up free speech. I almost, I mean, I've been out of school so long now. I have no association with the academy whatsoever. But it's, I almost feel like you have these enforced diversity training and gender courses, whatever that people have to take, at the start of university. I almost feel like they should take a course on the Enlightenment. Like, okay, you have to take this course, learn what the Enlightenment values were, learn what helped build, the best civilizations we've had, like the most advances we've had. There's a loss somewhere. There's a disconnect somewhere that's going on that I don't get.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I think there are the two sides to this. One is don't shut down anybody else from expressing their opinion in speech or writing, or anybody from being able to read or listen to the thing that they have chosen to read or listen to. But also, there are so many demands on our attention, and many of us, me in particular, we need to be more to know the value of our time, to be more conscious about what is and isn't a good use of our time. And we only have one go round on this planet. The clock is ticking away, and this is your life. And there are an awful lot of very entitled attention vampires on Twitter. Lots of people who are like...
I love that term, by the way.
Sorry?
The attention vampires. I love that.
Yeah, who are just like, how dare you mute me? How dare you block me? How dare you not engage me in a 40-tweet conversation? I'm like, what right do you have to 20 minutes of my one single precious life?
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, if this is time that I would wish back on my deathbed, I don't want to spend it on Twitter.
No, exactly. I am trying really hard to spend less time on Twitter, and I've recently been reading. I've been reading several books about this. Cal Newport. I don't know if you are familiar with him. He's written two books. One is called Deep Work, and the other one is called Digital Minimalism. And I'm currently reading Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections, which also has a lot to say about online versus real life. And I feel quite strongly that there is real life conversations are the gold standard. So the most life enriching interactions are the ones that we have with real people in the same place at the same time, face to face. Then the second richest are the conversations we have, like this one over Skype, where we can maybe see each other's faces. I mean, we right now can't, but often you can see each other's faces, and where we can talk to each other using our actual voices. And then the kinds of conversations that we have online, the online interactions they're not nothing. And I do find that it's very helpful to try to think through ideas online. I often get good feedback. It's good to formulate them, but there are several problems with them. One is that it's a kind of simulacra of real conversation that can be better than nothing, but can sometimes be worse than nothing. It's a bit like, I'm going to give a couple of slightly far-fetched analogies, but I think it might help. So I do keto, which I'm not. One of the rules of keto, the first rule of Keto Club is you must always talk about Keto Club. I'm not going to go into it in huge detail, although I'm a little evangelical about keto. I feel it's made a lot of difference to my health. But there are many people who on keto you can't have sugar or honey or fruit or many other types of natural sweet things. And there are some artificial sweeteners that you are permitted, and some people just eat things with artificial sweeteners all day long. But my sensation each time I've tried something with an artificial sweetener is it doesn't taste good in itself, but it tastes just sweet enough to remind me of what I'm missing by not eating actual sweet things. And so it's worse than not having anything sweet at all. I feel like, to give my second far-fetched analogy, it's a bit like if you're lonely or heartbroken because you don't have a girlfriend, boyfriend, or whatever, and you wish you did, and then you watch a romantic movie where the guy gets the girl, do you feel better about your own romantic life afterwards or worse? And these online conversations can often bear the same sort of relationship to real face-to-face conversation that the romantic movie can do to a real-life love affair. That's not to say that there's nothing in the romantic movie. So I'm watching Babylon 5 because I'm a complete fucking nerd. And I'm totally empathize with Delenn and Sheridan's relationship in that series. So it's not nothing. It's good to keep those feelings alive, but it's the relationship with it's very, very distant from the real thing. And the real thing is, the gold standard is face to face. And so that's one aspect, I think. And the other aspect is this frittering away of attention, that what we need, Daniel Levitin also talks about this in his book, The Organized Mind. And The Organized Mind and Darren Brown's book, Happy, are the two books that I am really evangelical about. To anybody who suffers from anxiety or depression, I recommend those two books. I think you should reread them every few years. And Levitin talks about unifocus, unitasking and unifocus, that what is important, the times that you can really do good work is when you are completely absorbed in an activity, and you may not be able to do very much of that work per day. In Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, he says 4 hours is the maximum. 4 hours within this state of actually deeply concentrating and working is the maximum you can aim for. And most people can probably manage 2 or 3. And my old supervisor, John Mullen, also always used to say, he said 5 hours of billable time working, or working makes it sound very dry, or writing or dancing or whatever the activity is that you are passionate about and that is meaningful to you, is, if you're doing 4 to 5 hours of it, that's a lot. So it's not that you can do this all day. Obviously you need to take breaks, but what you can't do is just do the thing for 30 seconds and then look at Twitter and then do it for another 30 seconds. You can't let your attention be constantly prey to all kinds of different demands. And I think it's very tough on Twitter, because if you are a quite polite person, which I'd like to think that I can be, I'm not always, but I can be, and people are asking you questions, it's very tempting to feel you owe them an answer. Because in real life, if you were sitting right here with me and we were having tea and you asked me a question, I wouldn't just ignore you.
Yeah.
So we feel that we should answer the person in the same way we would answer in real life, and in the same way if somebody attacks us, we feel we should defend ourselves. Just as in real life, if we're having an argument and you said something that was totally unfair, I would say, hey, that's unfair. But in fact, these aren't real life interactions. They're not going to give us the same level of satisfaction. but that also means we don't have the same level of obligation. And you need to just be wary of these time suck attention vampires and just learn to ignore. And I think that's one of the hardest lessons. And that has nothing to do with free speech. Free speech doesn't mean you are entitled to a fraction of somebody else's one single lifetime on this earth.
Yeah, no, and I agree with I agree with almost every word you said there, except for one thing, and it's just I wanted to talk to you about this as well because we both share a love of Star Trek.
Oh, yes.
But then you brought up Babylon 5. Now, granted, I saw it when it first came out and I could not stand it. So this is, I guess, going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe even the mid 90s when it first came out. And I couldn't stand it, so maybe I should go back and rewatch it. But I also have a love of all things sci-fi.
Me too.
And I think I got that from my father. And I mean, I remember we moved to Canada in December of 75. So when Star Wars came out in 77, it was this big thing. And so we went as a family. And then the following weekend, my dad came to my brother and I, because he knew my mom and my sister weren't really that into it. But he came to my brother and I, and he was the one who's like, do you guys want to go see Star Wars again? And my dad loved sci-fi as well. And I remember Sunday mornings, I would watch Star Trek with my dad. My brother and I would watch Star Trek with our dad. And then after Star Trek, we would get a feed from an American public broadcaster, and they would play Doctor Who. And my dad and I would watch Doctor Who. So, I grew up loving sci-fi. Like I said, but Babylon 5, I just never got into. Like, not in the least.
Oh, God. I have fallen so in love with Babylon 5, even though I had a very difficult beginning to our relationship. Anyway, I'm watching it on a website, and the episodes were out of order. So the very first episode I watched was actually an episode from the end of season 4, which they had substituted for the first Babylon 5 episode. And the same thing happened with the episode at the beginning of season 2, which is actually a crucial episode because it explains. Anybody listening, there are going to be a few spoilers. So if you're watching Babylon 5, you should skip to, and maybe we can put in a timestamp later when we finish this discussion. Just skip this little part. Because I think it's either the last episode of season 1 or first episode of season 2 explains the idea that the Minbari War ended because the Minbari discovered that Minbari souls were being reincarnated into human bodies. And instead, I had this episode where with a new telepath instead of the old one, which had come from the end of season 4, and where they had also changed over the Vorlon ambassador. And it was completely confusing to me, as you can imagine. So because of that, I was just I didn't understand why Delenn began the series with long dark hair, and then she was bald, and then she had long dark hair again, and why the Vorlon was a good guy and then he was a bad guy, and I had to go back and sort of rewatch. But once I finally figured out there were a couple of other episodes that were also mislabeled, but since I've managed to work that out and get back on track, I have been absolutely loving it, and I feel that, so Babylon 5 has this very intense, quite heightened dialogue that is not naturalistic, and it can be often quite aphoristic, quite philosophical, but I am more than willing to suspend my disbelief about that. I don't require dialogue to be naturalistic, and I rather like this rather Shakespearean feel of the dialogue. I feel as though it's dialogue trimmed down to how we would speak if we were all in a very beautifully written play. So it has this theatrical quality to it rather than a TV quality. That's the first thing that I feel, and um, I also absolutely, I love the Minbari religion. The Minbari have this atheistic, in a sense, religion. There's no God in the Minbari religion, but the universe itself is sentient. But it can only express its sentience through sentient beings, what in Star Trek we call humanoids, but but which is a little bit of a misnomer because they don't have to take this human shape, but only through sentience, as they're more appropriately, I think, called in Babylon 5. Um, and it is like shining a light on a wall, projecting a light onto a wall. We are the wall, and through us you can see the light, but the light source is elsewhere. And I absolutely love that. I love that image. I really enjoy the Minbari philosophy, and I feel that that philosophy is explained and fleshed out in a way that, for example, Bajoran philosophy on Deep Space Nine is not. The Bajorans are just kind of vaguely Buddhist-y, who knows what, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
I watched Deep Space Nine. I mean, I watched all the Star Trek up until Discovery, and I might give Discovery another try because I've heard the second season was really good. I didn't like the first. Um,
I absolutely adore Discovery, and I'm willing to die on that hill. So we can talk about that later.
yeah.
But
But I mean, the Deep Space Nine, I found out of all the so going from the original series to Enterprise, Deep Space Nine was the one I liked the least. Um, I mean, the original series still for me it's very cheesy, and William Shatner chews up the screen when he acts. But I
I
really,
I love William Shatner. I love that. You see, I love that kind of Shakespearean thespian acting and the morality play sort of feel of it.
I mean, I
Love,
love the original series, and then the Next Generation was really good, and that was another thing about the Next Generation was uh, uh, Patrick Stewart was a Shakespearean actor, and so he brought that at least with the way he spoke in the Next Generation. But yeah, I thought Enterprise was after Next Generation was probably my favorite series, and then Deep Space Nine
that's
was.
an interesting choice.
And no, okay, I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I got into Enterprise. I was overseas, and we had nothing to do. I mean, I was in middle of Afghanistan. There's nothing to do on the bases, so we would get someone would come home. They would download a series. They would bring it back. So you had nothing else to do, so you watch stuff, and I got into it. The second and third season I found were really well done. The first season, about the second half, I really liked, and the last season, I thought it was okay, but the second and third season I thought were as good as any of the other treks, and I really liked it.
It had its moments. I love the Andorians. Jeffrey Combs is just a magnificent actor, always. Um, I really enjoyed the plots with Shran. I couldn't deal with T'Pol, this kind of ultra sexy Vulcan character. But Deep Space Nine was my favorite by far, and I think I've watched it 5 times, and I will probably rewatch. But I would like to just return to Babylon 5 for a second because it's very fresh in my mind.
Sure,
And I have a couple more things I'd like to say in defense of it.
sure.
Um, so one thing about just returning to the Shakespearean quality of it, um, there is some really beautiful classic acting in Deep Space Nine too, but in Babylon 5, and I am just completely in love with Andreas Katsoulis, or his performance rather. I gather he was sort of a jerk in real life, having read some various accounts. But that I'm a real sucker for heroism, and I was having a little bit of a kind of argument with Greg Lukianoff, who is one of my favorite people on Twitter, And if my Twitter account is ever suspended, he is not that I interact with him that much, but whenever I interact with him, I feel what a lovely guy. But we're having a little bit of an argument because Greg felt that Babylon 5 is one kind of tough guy toughing it out and being courageous after another in every episode. And I think there might be something to that. That's a kind of machismo to Babylon 5. And I think I actually am a real sucker for that. And the one of the Jakar's character in Babylon 5 is I'm so moved by that character's portrayal of heroic masculinity. I think I'll put it that way. So I don't know to what extent Greg would disagree would feel this is machismo, but I think that as a kind of absolutely masculine character, well, with all the traditional masculine traits in this, it's utterly heroic. And I really like the fact that in Deep Space Nine, you have the Bajorans and the Cardassians, and the equivalent on Babylon 5 is the equivalents on Babylon 5 are the Centauri and the Narn. But whereas on Deep Space Nine, the Cardassians are these reptilian, they are literally reptilian, I think they have some reptile ancestry, these more reptilian-looking creatures, and the Bajorans basically look completely human, apart from a few lines across the nose. And the Bajorans are the good guys, the Cardassians the bad guys, generalizing, because Deep Space Nine is quite subtle in its treatment of species, which is a kind of stand-in for race. It's quite subtle in its treatment of that, but as a basic kind of rule, the Cardassians are the Nazis, and the Bajorans are the people on the occupied planet. And on Babylon 5, it's the other way around. The Narn are these quite frightening looking, they look a bit like leopards or jaguars, and they are much physically stronger, and they wear gloves because they have really, really sharp claws. And they have red eyes, and they look at first quite frightening and sinister. And the Centauri are basically look human. They aren't as human as they look. They have 6 penises, for example. The males have 6 penises. We learn later in the series. But basically, outwardly, when they're dressed, they look human apart from these weird bad hairstyles they have. It's kind of, a cross between Amy Winehouse and something out of Blackadder. But the Centauri are the fascists. There's kind of decadent fascist race that have Nazi elements and also elements that remind me of the Harkonnens in Dune. It's kind of late Roman Empire decadence, and it's the Narns who are the victims, and it's Jakar who is a Narn who is, for me, the most heroic character and the most engaging character. And I could watch Babylon 5 just for Andreas Katsoulis' acting alone. He is in this, he's wearing an enormous amount of prosthetics. He has this thick rubber mask on, painted, and he has contact lenses covering his eyes, and nevertheless his ability to emote through all of those prosthetics is just extraordinary. I can almost, when he is suffering or in pain, I can almost not watch. I can almost not watch his facial expression in pain and suffering. It's too painful to me. And the other thing, before I finish this long spiel about Babylon 5, which is probably boring all your listeners, but we should timestamp this whole sci-fi section so those who are not into this can just skip it. Um,
I'll put that in the description.
yeah, let's timestamp this section so only nerds, they can just be among us nerds. Uh,
Yeah.
but the other thing in Babylon 5 is that the plot, the way it's plotted, there are not too many Deus Ex Machina style scenes. There are not too many last minute saves, or kind of characters are the characters in Babylon 5 are very much not victims of their fates. But in Babylon 5, they're always, the writing gives the characters so many chances, so many choices. There are so many moments of decision where the character is faced with two choices and he can take the route towards good or he can take the route towards evil. And even if he takes the route towards evil, there's going to be another bifurcation later. You know, there are many second chances, there are many ways to redeem yourself, but at the same time, every decision you take has consequences. And I love that. I absolutely love that style of writing. And so far, I gather this changes later in the series, and I haven't seen it yet. But Londo Mollari, who is the main villain, I would say, of the series, the Centauri ambassador in Babylon 5, you see his kind of gradual slide into evil. And it really represents the banality of evil, how easy it is to get seduced little by little. And this, you see the same thing with Jakar, you see him being tempted towards bad choices in so many moments. There's so many moments when he could have gone towards the dark side, but every time it's his own choice is bringing him towards greater kind of enlightenment. And yeah, I love that about the writing. I love the fact that characters have choices and those choices have consequences, and the writing never shies away from the consequences. People are plotting to kill the president is killed. They want to take out Jakar's eye is taken out. That was the most horrible, worst scene in the entire thing for me so far, and we didn't even see it, and I still had nightmares. But so the writers have the courage of their convictions, but at the same time, the characters are not just buffeted by things at random. They are choosing, and I really like that. So that's my long spiel about
No, it's okay. Like I said, I'd watched it when it had first come out, and I just couldn't get into it. Maybe there was just too much other stuff going on. But I'm actually at home right now on an extended leave, so I've got nothing but time. So maybe I'll give it another try again after that passionate appeal or the I shouldn't say appeal, but the passionate description about Babylon 5. Maybe I'll give it another try, because I saw you tweeting about it, and I just had to bug you a little bit about it, because I honestly, like I said, when I first watched it, I couldn't stand it.
Oh, sure. I mean, I do like almost all sci-fi. I can watch even pretty bad sci-fi and enjoy it. I'm more fussy about what I read, but I can enjoy watching almost any sci-fi. I even enjoy Star Wars. Although I think Star Wars is more like space opera. It's missing the sci part of the sci-fi. But I can even enjoy that. Sorry, go on.
No, I mean, Star Wars, I liked the first three movies, and maybe it was because, like I said, Star Wars came out in 1977. I was 8. But any of the prequels and then these sequels now, they're awful. I think they're horrible.
Oh, well, I find them, I enjoy them. I enjoy those lush scenes of the different planets. I like that kind of, I just enjoy that, ambience. Um, but I'm not a huge fan. I don't really like this operatic heroic thing going on. I want to feel more like get a more lived in sense of the future places. But yeah, for me, my favorites are Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, which I absolutely adore, Asimov's novels, and my favorite sci-fi of all is Ursula Le Guin's completely perfect little novel, The Left Hand of Darkness,
Yeah,
which,
I love that book. That and is it the Lathe of Heaven? Probably is that the
well, I enjoy her other works, especially I think Dispossessed, and The Word for World is Forest. So I've read most of her other writing. I've read it with enjoyment, but never with the kind of passion that I feel about that specific book. And in fact, for a long time, I didn't read any of her other work because I was afraid it would disappoint me after that book. That's also the reason why I haven't read any other John Irving. I mean, this is really unfair on the author in a sense. I, I read A Prayer for Owen Meany, and I find that book so intensely moving that I was just like, right, I'm never reading any other Irving because there's no way he can top that, and I don't want to be disappointed. My expectations of him are so sky high now.
I,
Um,
I'm actually the opposite. If I read something by someone that I really like, I'm going to try to find everything that they've written. Like Ursula Le Guin. I mean, I was into fantasy far more than I was into science fiction when I was younger. I got more into science fiction as I got older, except for, like I said, Star Trek. I always liked Star Trek. So I read her the Wizard of Earthsea series,
yes, me
and
too.
and then
Enjoyed that.
that was the first thing I read, and I really liked that. I enjoyed it, and that from there I went on to read other stuff. And I'm the same thing. Like I said, if I find, especially in a genre like fantasy or science fiction, and there's one guy was Clive Barker. I was in India in the late '80s, and I was there for the whole summer, and I was looking for something to read, and I walked into a bookstore and I picked up one of his books, and I'd never heard of him. I had no idea who he was, and I read that book and I loved it. And after that, I went and got everything he wrote that I could get my hands on.
Mm. Well, with Ursula Le Guin, I feel like if she had only written The Left Hand of Darkness and nothing else, she would still be one of the truly great writers. That novel is it's a perfect little jewel. It's just, it's that story could only have happened to those characters. That that the set it could only have happened in that setting, and it could only have happened with those premises. The premises of the um, the androgynous race, and it's just there is it ranges so widely across topics. It talks about so we have sexuality, we have different governmental systems, monarchy and communism, and space travel, and love, and yet it's so economical. There is not a single superfluous word in that book, and it's almost quite intimidating, the level of skill and inspiration that went into that world. And it has this kind of Thomas Hardy-esque tragedy to it that Estroven gets everything that he wants, but always too late. It's just, that which is exactly how Hardy novels also work, except that in Hardy novels we know in advance that the characters are going to arrive too late or receive the thing too late. That's how Hardy novels works. He likes to get likes to have the reader in on it. So you're watching, you have dramatic irony, and dramatic irony is when, for example, you see the woman going going blithely into her flat, and you know the killer is hiding behind the door with a knife. That's dramatic irony. When you, the watcher or reader, know something the character doesn't know, and you're kind of screaming at them, no, no, don't do it. And it doesn't have that dramatic irony, which I'm really happy about, but it has that ironic sort of mistiming. At one point, Estevan says, "Why can I never set my heart on a possible thing?" And I'm just, oh. I mean, there are so many beautiful, beautiful aphoristic quotations in that book, but that's the one that really gets to me every time.
Okay. I just want to talk about a couple other things because I've taken up quite a bit of your time, and thank you very much. Your podcast, the Two for Tea podcast, you also do that with Helen.
Here ends the science fiction section.
Yep, here ends the science fiction.
Great for the non-nerds to read the conversation.
Okay, but again, like I said, I knew nothing of Tango. I appreciated your book because of your passion for it, and I think the way you passionately talked about Babylon 5, I think someone could appreciate that. But I'll give people fair warning: if they don't want to listen to it, they don't have to. But your podcast, did you start that as an accompaniment to Areo, or were you wanting to do that on its own, and it just kind of sort of fell in like that, or how did that come about?
Um, no, what happened with the podcast is that it was planned as an accompaniment to Areo, and the idea was that Helen and I together were going to do the podcast. And if you go back to the first episode of the podcast is Helen and I talking at some length about our own ideas and views. And we wanted to interview different people each week. But our idea was that we would host the podcast together. And then quite shortly after that, first of all, the whole social hoax stuff exploded. So Helen was hugely in demand, and then Helen was commissioned to write her book. So as I hope many people know, Helen is writing a book about critical theory and its origins in postmodernism and how it has adapted and changed postmodernist views, what the main ideas are, and how activists have used those. And I think she is one of the few people, the only person I know who is incredibly knowledgeable about theory and a complete skeptic about it. So she is going to give you a well-informed skeptic's view of theory. Anyway, a little digression about plugging Helen's forthcoming book, which I'm editing. So I get to have a sneak preview. So we decided to begin it together, but then Helen was too busy to be able to commit to a regular podcasting. So at first we were podcasting quite irregularly whenever Helen was able to, and then I decided it would be better to just podcast every week and just interview people on my own if Helen was not available. And so Helen basically gave the running of the podcast over to me. So I choose the guests and I prepare the questions, and if Helen is free and interested, she comes and joins us. But I'm the one who makes sure that I've read the person's book or articles and that I have my questions prepared, and I'm the one who chooses the guests and topics. And I think I have become better at podcasting over the course of the podcast. It began in August of last year. So I guess the podcast has been going for 6 to about 7 months. I've been doing it, and I'd never done any I've been interviewed on a few podcasts myself, but I'd never done any interviewing. And in the first few podcasts, I'm umming and ahhing an awful lot, but I become a bit more fluent as I go along. And at first, it wasn't very regular because I was trying to fit it around Helen's schedule, but now it comes out almost every Sunday. Occasionally, I've missed a Sunday because of force majeure, but almost every Sunday it comes out. And it's been enormously enjoyable. I have had some really wonderful guests. And
sorry, I just going to interrupt for 1 second. And if for anyone listening, if you haven't heard that podcast, it's thoroughly enjoyable. I might miss it 1 week, but I always catch up.
Yes, please link to it in the show notes. I also talk about Tango and my book in a lot more detail in the most recent episode. The most recent episode, I did one on the culture of Argentine tango, so that's up there.
Okay.
And I talk mostly, I've talked about politics a lot on the podcast, but I also, if somebody has recently published a book which I think is interesting, then I will often have them on the podcast. So I think some of the highlights for me were the second issue when Helen and I talked to Sarah Haider, and we talked about ex-Muslims, about leaving Islam, about atheism, and about the notion of community, and also about online discourse. Sarah is just a luminous intellect. And I also really loved, it's sort of hard to choose, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff came on to talk about the coddling of the American mind. That was definitely one of the highlights for me. I also really, really loved talking to Will Storr, who wrote Selfie, and we talked about the cult of self-esteem. We talked about depression, anxiety, insecurity, self-esteem, and how those things are connected. And another very sort of, two other, I think, very highlight-y ones for me were talking about circumcision, which you wouldn't think you could talk for an hour and a half on that topic, but you most certainly can. So I'm going to title, I haven't changed the titles of all the episodes yet, but I'm in the process of creating a new website for it, and I'm going to put more interesting titles. And that one is going to be called In Defense of the Foreskin with Brian David Earp. I had unexpected fun on talking about that. I hope if it's Muslim, this is not kind of too personal to you.
Oh, I know, but okay. I mean, like, sorry, I've heard Brian Earp speak on another podcast, and I heard him speak on yours, but it's just, I'm not trying to be. It's just funny to hear someone say, like, I had fun talking about circumcision, because it's because I mean, okay, there is, obviously there's some puns that you can have in there as well.
Yes. It was kind of, I mean, I guess it's not so funny, haha, but it was really nice to take a deep dive into a very specific small topic. I love doing that kind of thing. And I also really love talking to Thomas Chatterton Williams about mixed race identities, which I am planning to write a book about, or I've started writing a new book about that. My book is called The Half Caste, is its working title. So that was a topic very dear to my heart. Those are some of my favorites.
I mean, again, that's one of the reasons that's one of the things I really enjoy about Twitter. If it wasn't for Twitter, I wouldn't have gotten to, know about your work and then know about that podcast. And you do have an eclectic set of guests on. It's like the same thing with like the Joe Rogan. I mean, he puts out so much though, and he has so many different people on. It's like, okay, he puts out 5 a week. I might only watch 2, but am I really going to complain? The guy's putting out 15 hours of stuff a week pretty much, and I watch 6 of it or something. And so I, like I said, those are the some of the things, because I've gotten fed up with television. I've gotten fed up with most things on television. There's not a lot out there, and I love finding this stuff on the internet now. There's, I mean, you can find yourself a niche, or you can find yourself something like what you're doing, where you're talking to different people over a wide range of subjects, and keep people engaged, right?
Yeah. I think always the problem is money.
Yeah.
The podcast is a lot of work, and it's my dream that I could either have enough patrons or have enough listeners that I could monetize it. Mm-hmm. I think from 25,000 on is when you can monetize. So I'm a really long way off that now. There's probably about 4,000 listeners.
I think on YouTube, it's once you reach 1,000 subscribers and you've got so many hours of people listening to your stuff, then it's monetize. You can monetize it.
Yeah, podcasts may be more because the monetizing is through advertising. I'm not sure. That's the figure that was recently quoted to me.
Okay.
So it's my dream to be able to make enough money on the podcast that I could devote significant time to it. At the moment, my income is so low that I am thinking of going back to India because I really want to write my book. So I want to be able to continue living from just editing, doing Areo, doing the podcast. I say just, but it's really a lot of work. Mm-hmm. Doing a full-time job, but I'm not earning a normal salary or salary high enough for the first world or even for Argentina. And I don't want to give that up and get an office job because I really do want to produce more writing. I feel that I have an important voice and I want to put that voice out into the world. So always money is the limiting factor. If it weren't, I would happily podcast every day. I would love that. But it's when I do an episode of the podcast, my preparation is that I often have guests on who've recently published a book. I read the book. Sometimes I review the book for Areo, which it takes me a few days to write a review. I read whatever articles they have published, and then the actual podcasting itself, the hour or so of podcasting itself, is the least of the amount of time invested. It's all very, very enjoyable time, though. And I do also have a volunteer sound engineer, so that is incredible. It would be impossible without him. And without my sound engineer, Justin Ward, who I'm going to blow a kiss to. He's not listening to this. I don't think he has time. But maybe I'll try and timestamp this bit where I blow him the kiss later and send it to him. He is the babeliest babe in all of Canada, and he is my favorite man. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. I understand. Like right now, I'm as I mentioned, I'm on an extended leave, so I've a lot of time. But I do this all myself. So I was going to ask you that. Like, how do you? So when I edit it myself, and I'm trying to figure it out as I go along, but then I have to listen to myself speak, and I hate that. I hate listening to myself talk.
Well, I listen to it through because I put timestamps in, and show notes, and links to anything that anybody's mentioned during the conversation, and also I give it a kind of check through. I don't mind listening to my own voice at all.
Yeah, but you have a lovely brogue, and I've kind of monotone, gravelly thing going on.
Really? I think that I have many problems with my voice, and I used to do theatre, and I gave up because my speaking voice really sits in a bad place. So my voice is high-pitched, and it's quite soft, and I can't project well. So when I try to project, I'm shouting and I get a sore throat. When I was an academic, I had my own portable microphone. I would carry my microphone around for lectures, and even sometimes at seminars I would use a microphone because students couldn't hear me. And I took singing lessons in an attempt to help, and I can produce. I'm not very musical, but I can produce a good sound when I'm singing, but I could still not manage to do that speaking. So, and I've had so many criticisms of my voice. Lots of people hate my voice. And I had a lot of kind of comments. I think one of the first podcasts that I did at all as a guest was I went on Benjamin Boyce's podcast. It's called The Voice of Reason.
I actually saw that one.
And apparently a lot of people complained to Benjamin that they couldn't listen to that, they couldn't watch that episode or listen to it because no offense to me, but my voice was so incredibly annoying. Who could listen to such an annoying voice?
No offense intended. No, okay, that's maybe it's just me though. But like I said, I find you have I like the Scottish brogue, and I think you have a lovely. Like I said, if I could, I would hire you to narrate my life.
I would love that. I love reading aloud, and I would really love to do my own audiobook, and I love reading poetry and things. As I said, I used to do theatre, and I really enjoyed theatre, but I cannot project. I cannot make my voice loud without straining and damaging my vocal cords and getting a sore throat. I can either speak quietly or I can shout. I can't do the booming thing. Yeah. And my voice is naturally really high. When I was singing, I sang in the coloratura soprano range, so I could hit some very high notes, not with a particularly pleasant sound, or I can't sing very well in the sense of doing a good performance, but I can impress you by opening my mouth and bringing out the top F or G, kind of Queen of the Night style thing, because I do just have a really very high natural voice. But for speaking it, that's a big disadvantage.
Well, on that note, I'm going to let you go because, like I said, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time. I just wanted to ask you, do you have, because I'll put any of your links to your social media for Areo, for your podcast, if there's anything else you want to, where people can find you, any last words or anything you are coming up that you want to discuss, please go ahead.
Well, I would love people to go and check out my book, and there are some reviews on Amazon. And maybe you could put a link in the show notes.
Oh, for sure.
Americans need to buy the book on Amazon. Everybody else, I would love it if you would buy directly from my publisher. It's a small independent publisher. I'm not making any money on this book. And the publisher is not even breaking even yet. So
if you send me that, I will definitely include the link to that in the show notes.
That's great, and I'll give you a link to my Areo writings and also to the podcast feed, and I have a general website, so I'll include that as well if anyone is interested.
Sure. And again, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening, and I will be back.